everyone, I'm Leanne and today I'm going to be reviewing all of the books that I read in March. So March was of course the Irish Readathon and I read solely Irish books during the month. Thank you so much for everyone who participated in the Readathon. I feel like my interaction with the community was a little bit patchy over the month, but I've seen so many posts, I've seen so many comments. I really enjoyed watching everyone's videos, seeing your TBRs and your reviews. And in terms of my own reading for the month, I think it was a really successful reading month for me, both in terms of quantity and quality. So I read 12 books and there were definitely some 5 stars and potentially new favourites in the mix as well. It wasn't all good. There are some books that I have quite mixed feelings on. But without further ado, let's get into my thoughts. I'm gonna start with one of the big hitters. This was a book that lots of people either had already read and were talking about in the run-up to the Irish Readathon, or they, like me, were reading it for the Readathon. And that was Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. I've spoken a lot on this channel about my broader relationship with Sally Rooney's work, in that I absolutely adored Normal People. It will always be one of my favourite books of all time. I thought Conversations with Friends was fine, and I did not like Beautiful World, Where Are You? So I went into this with quite mid expectations. I had heard people say that it was quite difficult to get into, but then I'd also heard lots of people say that it was really accomplished and fantastic and they loved it. And I think where I end up on that spectrum is quite interesting within the contextualization of how I feel about her work more broadly, in that I enjoyed Normal People far more, but I think this book is far better. So in this book, we follow 2 brothers who are quite different in personality and also in how they are processing the aftermath of grief when their father has passed away. They both have quite different presentations of their masculinity. They both have quite different personality types, in that one of them, the younger brother, is quite sort of reserved. He's like this kind of chess prodigy. And then the older brother is a bit more kind of extroverted and outgoing, and he has kind of a successful job. And as with many of Sally Rooney's characters, they have a complete inability to communicate effectively with one another. But it was really interesting to see how Rooney depicted that miscommunication in a sibling dynamic rather than in a romantic relationship dynamic, as we've seen her do previously. That's not to say this book is without romantic relationships. They're definitely there. The younger brother finds himself entering into a relationship with an older woman. And when I say older woman, he's 22 and she's in her 30s. So like, she's not old, but like comparatively to him and the life experience that he has, it's definitely a significant age gap relationship. Meanwhile, the older brother is kind of caught between these 2 situationships. One with kind of his teenage sweetheart, who we come to learn was in some sort of accident when they were in a relationship that kind of led to them breaking up, or their relationship not functioning in the way that they wanted to. And I think the breakdown of that relationship also has a lot of miscommunication in it. And it's not specified exactly why, but the consequences of her accident in some sort of physical way makes having sex really challenging, if not impossible, for her. So it's sort of like he's in this kind of emotional relationship with her while also having a sexual relationship with someone else. And that relationship comes with various complications as well. I could probably do a whole video talking about this book because there was so much nuance and depth to all of the characters, and I think another writer would have painted them in a more 2-dimensional way. I think if you took the characters of both of these brothers and they were written without the depth and nuance that Sally Rooney gives them, they would just be wholly unlikable in a very kind of men are trash kind of way. But because you are so kind of closely linked with them and their thought process, and that kind of largely comes from the narrative style that Sally Rooney uses and how kind of stream of consciousness and connected you are to the characters, because you have that connection to them, you really understand where they're coming from. And I think it's one of the most fascinating depictions that I've read of the melting pot of masculinity and grief and sibling relationships and the breakdown of the family unit and the guilt that comes with that. I definitely agree with all of the reviews that kind of say the book was quite difficult to get into. I do agree with that, but I do think the payoff is definitely worth it. And as I said, this might not be my kind of personal favorite, oh my god, I love this book so much, but I actually think it's one of the best and most accomplished novels I've ever read. I also read Hey Zoe by Sarah Crossan. So I've read quite a few Sarah Crossan books in the past, and I mainly associate her writing style with young adult verse. And I always really love that. I love the verse form as a way of storytelling in a way that's quite unique, but also I think there's something about that style that gives the storytelling a real kind of immediacy to it. This isn't written in verse, but it's definitely written in kind of very short, brief sections that give that kind of same immediacy to the action. In this book, we are following Dolores and what happens after she finds a sex doll belonging to her husband, and the kind of breakdown of their relationship that follows on from that. There were lots of problems in their relationship before this discovery, but when she finds the doll, it's really kind of the catalyst to bring a lot of suppressed feelings of resentment to the forefront. And I think it was quite a balanced depiction of their relationship. I don't think either party in the relationship is seen as kind of the good guy or the bad guy. Again, I think another storyteller would have presented the male character in a very different way. It would have been very easy to depict him as, again, just kind of like this, men are trash. Oh my God, he was keeping this sex doll when his wife didn't know about it. That's disgusting. That's not what you end up feeling towards his character. What I think was really fascinating about the progression of this story was the attachment that our main female character ends up feeling towards the doll. And actually both members of that marriage were desperately seeking companionship and connection. And in different ways, they end up finding it with the doll. It's a book that's largely about loneliness. And I think if you have watched any of the kind of like sci-fi shows like Black Mirror, where there are those episodes that touch on things like robots, like AI, I think you'll find this quite interesting amongst all of that other kind of sci-fi media. It was such a quick read as well. As I said, the kind of writing style of it makes it really digestible and really kind of compulsively readable. And this topic is something that I always find really interesting. So I was really glad to read something that gave a slightly different perspective to it than I'd read before. I also read Thirst Trap by Grania O'Hare. So this is coming out on the 12th of June. This is a proof copy, and I think this is a contender for my favourite book of the year. So we are following 3 female friends that live in a house share in Belfast, and we come to learn that it used to be a 4-person house share, but their 4th friend and housemate has passed away. So all 3 of the girls are dealing with the aftermath of that and the grief and how kind of complicated their relationship was with this friend when she died. From the beginning of the novel, we know that there's some sort of reason that they fell out with her to varying degrees before she died. And when you come to realize the origins of that conflict, it feels like just a real gut punch. I think this novel so expertly captured that feeling of being in your late 20s, approaching your 30s, still kind of living in a house share with your friends and being in sort of a kind of between stage of your life. You know, it's something that I talk about a lot with my own friends, and I suppose we're at a similar stage of life as the characters in this book, where amongst your peers there can be a real difference in kind of financial situation and living situation and kind of families and relationships. Like, some people are still really very much in a period of their life where they're going partying all the time and they're taking drugs and they're drinking loads, and some people are settled down with a marriage and kids. I have read a lot of books that kind of look at that period in someone's life and do look at kind of maybe party girls that are thinking about whether that's really what they want to continue doing with their life. But I even think the setting of this book made it so different to a lot of those books I'd read before, because I'd read a lot of books that followed that experience very focused on kind of like a London setting. This being in Belfast made it feel much fresher. I think it perfectly captured the messiness of friendship. I thought the character of the dead friend's boyfriend was a fantastic addition to the book. And I think this was a book that perfectly nails that thing of being so specific in how it describes things and what it references that it makes it feel so universal. That feeling of when you are reading a book and you're like, oh my God, I know that person. Oh my God, I've done that exact thing. Oh my God, I see my life reflected in this novel. Even if you have quite different experiences, the specificity of which the author is able to describe stuff makes it feel really connected to you as a reader, at least from my own experiences anyway. I thought it was so brilliant and I highly, highly recommend it. I also read The Happy Couple by Nisha Dolan, and this was another fantastic read for me. So in this book, we are following the relationship between Celine and Luke, who are engaged to be married, and we are following them in the run-up to the wedding. And we see their relationship not only from their own perspectives, but from the perspective of other people that are close to them in their lives in various ways. So we're learning about them from lots of different viewpoints, and it's really interesting to see how a character is built up from other people's perspectives. There were very kind of astute observations about people's kind of approach to romantic relationships and how complicated that they can be, and how this kind of societal expectation to settle down and get married in quite a traditional way can be really quite damaging for relationships. I also found it really refreshing to have two bisexual leads in the book. I don't actually think I've read a book where both of the main characters were bisexual, and certainly not one where it was a male-female relationship and both parties were bisexual. So I really appreciated that. There are kind of elements of like feelings for other people and infidelity that surrounds the relationship, and I do often find that quite annoying when it comes to bisexual characters, because I think it sometimes feeds that trope of, or that stereotype of, bisexuals being greedy and cheating. But because the representation of their sexualities felt so kind of incidental, it wasn't necessarily a big deal. It didn't really feel like their sexuality was relevant to their behavior. And I think that balance is quite tricky to pull off. So I was really impressed the author was able to do that. Another one where I just really enjoyed it. I also read Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell. So this book is set in Dublin, and we follow the mother of two children who is in an emotionally abusive, kind of coercive relationship. And we follow the decision that she finally makes to try and flee with the children. And essentially we follow her kind of going through the system and the obstacles and red tape that she continuously comes up against in order to try secure her safety and the safety of her two daughters, while her husband is still trying to gain control of her and manipulate her and coerce her. I think you feel such a connection to the main character in this book, and you really just want the best for her, and you want her to be able to make it out of this situation, and you feel her frustration as she continuously comes up against these kind of systemic barriers that prevent her from progressing and getting her freedom. I think this is quite an important book in terms of highlighting that, and particularly within an Irish context, and how that system is set up in a way that is so restrictive and prohibitive. It's one of those books that you really sort of viscerally feel frustration on behalf of the character. And I think any book that can really kind of elicit such a kind of tangible feeling in you as a reader is very impressively done. Okay, so we've had a lot of success. Lots of books that I really enjoyed here. Let's talk about one that I didn't enjoy. I read Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. I don't know what I went into this book expecting. I kind of thought this was one of those books that I probably should just give a go to, because I had heard such fantastic acclaim about it. And what I will say is I think on a line level and kind of a scene level, the writing is fantastic, but the actual story and plot I found quite lacking. So it's set in the late 1500s, and we are following Shakespeare's family, but in a way that supposedly decenters Shakespeare as part of the narrative. So we do see things from his perspective, but he is at no point named, which I find just kind of a weird choice. Like, we know who it's about, and would we be interested in this book if it wasn't about him? I find it just a weird choice that he's not named, and quite a laboured point, I think. But anyway, we're meant to be focusing more on his wife, someone that we probably know as Anne Hathaway, but she is referred to as Agnes, because there are records of her being referred to as Agnes. And it's based around the lead up to their son Hamnet dying. And not long afterwards, we know that Shakespeare wrote the play Hamlet, which is of course very famous. I think it's quite interesting that this book is called Hamnet when it is more largely about Agnes, the wife. And I think my issue with this book, aside from the fact it was actually just quite boring, is that if the intention is to highlight Agnes as a character and highlight the wider family as just as kind of important as the playwright that is being used to hook us into this story, then it's quite unfortunate that the wider family are presented as not particularly interesting, and it kind of makes you just sort of think, well, I understand why we were focused on William, because he seems like the most interesting member of the family. The character of Agnes also has these kind of weird, like, seeing into the future kind of witchy powers, which are a fabrication, like that is fiction. So I feel like the author was simultaneously saying, let's pay attention to Agnes, she was actually just as interesting as her husband, but I'm gonna make up stuff about her to try and make her more interesting. Do you see what I mean, and why that bothers me? And you know what my overwhelming feeling was when I was reading this book? It was that I wanted to read or watch Hamlet. I really went harder on the negativity for that one than I was expecting to, but once I started yapping, it just all started to come out. I'm sorry. I also read So Late in the Day by Claire Keegan. So in this short story, we're following this guy called Cathal who is coming home from the office one day, and he begins to reflect on his relationship with his ex-fiance. And over the course of us learning more about this relationship, we just kind of come to realize that Cathal was a bit of an arsehole. And this short story is largely about kind of misogyny and the kind of subtle ways that misogyny can occur in heterosexual relationships. And it's often ways that men don't even really like understand, because they're not being kind of blatantly hateful or like insulting or kind of putting anyone in danger, but they are still doing these really damaging moments of misogyny and ways of treating their partners. And I think for such a short story, Claire Keegan does a really fantastic job of demonstrating that and doing it in a way that is very much showing, not telling. So yeah, I thought this was really great. Definitely want to read more of Claire Keegan's short stories. I also read 2 books from Marian Keyes. So I read No Dress Rehearsal, and I meant to include this in my recent Irish book haul, but I forgot to include it because I'd already read it by the time it came to doing that video, and I had put it in my just finished book pile instead of my to haul book pile. I've mentioned quite a few times on the channel that I am trying to read all of Marian Keyes' books in publication order, and I realised that there was one that I didn't have, and that was this short story. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get my hands on it because like this is out of print, it's not particularly like well known. I think it was written as part of a program to kind of make literacy more accessible to adults that may have not thought that it was for them. But I did manage to find a copy secondhand, which is very pleasing for me and my completionist approach to Marian Keyes' writing. But in this book we are following Lizzie, and Lizzie dies. She doesn't realize this when it happens, so she's just trying to carry on with her life and everyone is like ignoring her and she doesn't know why. She tries to go to work the next day and she then meets 2 spirits who are there to kind of usher her to the other side. And the short story is largely about kind of encouraging you to live life to the fullest while you're there, because you don't know when it's going to be taken away from you, and how you can't be holding back on things because you don't get a second chance. I enjoyed this one a lot. I don't really have much more to say about it. I think it was very interesting to see something short form from Marian Keyes, because obviously her novels are always quite chunky, so I really enjoyed having something a bit shorter from her. Every year for the Irish Readathon, I do always read a Marian Keyes novel, and this time I read Sushi for Beginners. It was the next one on the list to read. You're following 3 female characters in this book who, depending on sort of like the choices that they make, they could be on the verge of something that is really fantastic and happy for them, or something that could lead to like a whole breakdown. So we have Aisling and Clodagh. Aisling is an assistant. She's very kind of organized, but she worries about like every aspect of her life. She's very anxious, she's very kind of self-conscious, and her best friend Clodagh has kind of on the surface got everything that you might want from life. She's got the husband, she's got the kids, she's got the house, and she's not happy. We then also have Lisa, who is a magazine editor from England who expected her career to take her to New York. Instead, she finds herself with a new role in Dublin, which she's really not pleased about, and her character's quite insufferable in a very like English way, and her character really encapsulates a lot of kind of stereotypical thinking that some English people have about Ireland and about Irish people. So I found that quite frustrating to read. And more broadly, I didn't love this book. In addition to not really liking Lisa's character, I wasn't particularly compelled by the other 2 either. And whilst I don't think this was a bad book, I just think within the context of the other Marian Keyes books I've read, I understand why this one is potentially less well known. It definitely has all of the kind of razor wit and observational humour that Marian Keyes has in all of her books, with the emotional depth that you'd come to recognise from her writing as well. but just not her strongest for this one, which is a shame because I do always consider like the Marion Keyes book I read such a highlight of my Irish Readathon reading, but I definitely will read another book from her within the year, which I will hopefully enjoy more. To finish up, I have 3 books from the same author. So I have The Stormkeeper's Island by Catherine Doyle. This is a magical middle grade adventure where we follow Fionn going to Arranmore Island to spend time with his grandfather, who is a relatively kind of eccentric and secretive old man, and he is also the Stormkeeper, which is a very protective role on the island that keeps it safe from this kind of ancient magic. And what I really enjoyed about this was that use of folklore and ancient Ireland in how the story was told. There is trouble brewing on the island. The island is due to choose a new Stormkeeper, and we learn more and more about the traditions and the history and the power that comes with that role alongside Fionn. I think that's one of the things I really love about middle grade fantasy, is that you are discovering things along with the main character. I think it was really brilliantly written, and I definitely want to read the next books in the series. And from the same author, Catherine Doyle, I read Inferno and Mafiosa. So these are the second and third books in the Blood for Blood series. I read the first book, Vendetta, last year for the Irish Readathon, and I enjoyed it so much. It was just such fun escapist reading, and I would definitely say the same for books 2 and 3. They were just thoroughly entertaining. They are mafia romances. So in the first book, we follow Sophie beginning to learn about secrets that are in her family, and also some new boys in the town who are these kind of mysterious and very hot young guys. One of them in particular, she strikes up this chemistry and romance with, but as the story progresses, it gets even more complicated, both from the romance perspective, but also from the mafia perspective, as Sophie finds herself pulled deeper and deeper into the web of the danger that comes with these families. If you are looking for something that is just pure fun and entertainment, I would really recommend the series. So that is it. They are the 12 books that I read during the Irish Readathon. Definitely my most successful and enjoyable reading month so far. It's definitely given me a lot of momentum going into my April reading. I really just want to be reading like banger after banger in April. That's what I want. Do leave me a comment down below and let me know if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, or if you participated in the Readathon. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. It means so much to me and to Aoife. If you participated, do leave me a comment down below and let me know what your favorite book you read was. What emoji shall I ask you to leave? Is there like a sushi emoji? If you want to let me know you're here but you don't have anything to say, leave me a sushi emoji. If there's not a sushi emoji, then like a fish. I don't know. That is it for me today. I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you in my next video.